Hello, everyone. Welcome to Wall Street from Main Street podcast. My name is Mo Daoud, and today's special guest is Jeffrey Tucker. Jeffrey Tucker is the CEO of Liberty.me, a social network and online publishing platform for the liberty-minded. He's also a distinguished fellow of the Foundation of Economic Education. He's the executive editor of the Laissez-Faire books. He's also a research fellow at Action Institute, the founder of the Cryptocurrency Conference, and he's also authored 5 books. Jeffrey, thank you for joining us.
It's really great to be here. Thank you, Mo, for having me.
Okay, great. I want to start off this podcast by having a Austrian Economic one-on-one for our audience that doesn't know much about Austrian economics and the difference between Austrian and central planning economics, or Keynesian economics, what other people would like to call it. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the difference between Austrian and central planning economics. What are the main differences?
The main difference is that Austrians have a heavy focus on human beings as the central economic actors, and whereas mainstream economics tends to abstract away from human choice and only think about mathematical aggregates. So that's the major difference. The Austrian school has a very long tradition and a lot of really interesting insights. They've always been in favor of free market money, against central banking, against socialism, against central planning of all sorts, and believe that the market has within itself a kind of inherent stabilizing mechanisms that can only be made to malfunction by government intervention. I would say that's a good short summary. So the Austrian school's been around about 140 years, but it has a tradition that traces back about 500 years, actually, in the history of ideas. And it's relevant for the Bitcoin discussion because the Austrians have a description of the origin of money that's very similar to how Bitcoin came about, actually. The Austrians have always said that money originates in market exchange. It's not imposed by government or it comes about through some social consensus. It comes about through entrepreneurship and real market exchange. And that's pretty much how Bitcoin came about, too.
And we'll definitely get to Bitcoin later in this podcast. So going back to Austrian economics, and one of the things that Austrian economists have a better track record compared to the central planning economics, such as the Federal Reserve, is predicting the boom and bust in the economy. A lot of Austrian economics predicted the housing bubble, dot-com bubble, and other boom and bust that occurred in the past century.
Sure.
So why are the Austrians better at predicting the boom and bust better than the central planning economy?
Because the Austrians have a better theory for how the world works. They don't believe that you can manufacture prosperity out of a printing press. And every time you attempt to do that, all you do is distort the production structure. You create bubbles in some areas, and those bubbles are unsustainable. And you can see this happening all the time when the Federal Reserve intervenes and lowers the discount rate lower than the market would allow. It floods the economy with money, or at least the money goes somewhere in any case, and it creates speculative bubbles. That's been true for hundreds of years. The Austrian theory emphasizes that the problem is not so much the bust, it's the boom that's inconsistent with underlying patterns of savings and capital and the capital stock. So if you get good at this, you can begin to detect that there are bubbles in the economy. And clearly, by the late 2000s, there was a huge bubble in real estate, mostly caused by various forms of government intervention, the Federal Reserve among them. And if you look back in history, you can see the same thing is true in the late 1970s and the recession of 1982 and going all the way back in history. And in fact, the Austrians have a really compelling explanation of the Great Depression, too, as a result of 1920s loose monetary policy. They created a speculative bubble in stocks, and that eventually blew up. So that's the Austrian theory, and it's proven to be true again and again. It's had much more predictive power than Keynesian economics. When the Austrians predicted after 2008 that we would not see economic recovery on the level that people thought we were going to, and sure enough, we haven't. I mean, the first quarter of 2014 saw negative economic growth, shrinking economy in the U.S. This is after 5 years of stimulus policy. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, if it wasn't for the Obamacare, I read somewhere that the GDP would have actually been in the negative rather than 1%. So it tells you how bad the economy is. And also, if you look at the statistics, like 80% of the graduating class in 2013 and 2014 cannot find a full-time job. So to me, that's not a recovering economy.
No.
And you also look at...
Yeah, and the unemployment rate, too, is a little bit deceptive, because it's true that it's been falling, but the new jobs are very low pay, highly insecure, nothing like what they were before the recovery, before the recession. So this has been, I guess, the weakest so-called economic recovery on record, really. And there doesn't seem to be any hope that it's going to get better.
No, it looks like the government is staying on course with what they're doing. It's printing money, bailing out the banks, and destroying middle class with inflation and wealth transfer.
Yeah, that's it. And as you said about Obamacare, that doesn't make anything better. That really, we had a pretty shabby healthcare system before, but that was just really very much of a devastating blow to what was good in the system, and took away what was good and added a whole layer of new bad stuff, actually.
And that's a good point. And one of the reasons why government and Federal Reserve are bad at predicting the economy is because, as you said, they use complex financial models on an Excel spreadsheet, but the economy, doesn't work that way. You cannot determine how well the economy is going to do in the future by looking at a couple numbers in a spreadsheet and determining that if we print this much money, the economy will grow by this much.
No, and the Federal Reserve doesn't even know what it's doing, really. It's been trying to create an expanded money supply stock for 5 years, but it's been actually largely unsuccessful. It's been creating large amount of bank balances, trillions and trillions of dollars, but it's not entering into the hot money in the street because the lending markets are so broken.
And it makes me wonder if the Federal Reserve actually know what they're doing, or are they just that dumb that they think things are actually going to get better?
I think the problem is that they're out of tools. Their old tools that they used to have don't work anymore because structurally the banking system is very different from what it used to be. It used to be the case that the banking system was worked according to old-fashioned monetarist principles. They could control how much money there was. Now everything is so complicated, they don't even know where the money is going to end up so much.
And that's a great point. Now, let's change our topic here and talk about the role of interest rate in the economy, which most important, the foundation of an economy is interest rate, because it determines what business are going to do, and it determines price and wages as well. So why is it important not to have government to manipulate the interest rate and money supply, which is what the Federal Reserve do?
Well, the interest rate is really a price. It's the price of credit, and in that sense, it's always dangerous to manipulate it. In the same sense, it's dangerous to manipulate the price of anything. If you arbitrarily go into the grocery store and change the price of eggs on the shelves, you could just imagine the chaos that's going to cause. If you raise the price, people are going to sell fewer, and then the inventory management's going to be all mixed up, and it's going to devastate the supply manufacturers and so on. If you lower it below the market price, you're going to sell more at a loss, and that's going to reduce profitability. And anytime you change the price of anything from the market economy, what the market economy would dictate, you're going to introduce distortions. So it's the same thing with the price of credit. You change the interest rates arbitrarily, and suddenly the interest rates are not giving you a true reflection of the savings rate in the economy and how much people are willing to sacrifice in the present for future production. So what you end up doing is kind of goosing the economy temporarily, but it becomes unsustainable. But in the case of the most recent zero interest rate policies of the Federal Reserve, we've seen sort of different effects. What it's done is it's made lending on the part of banks just incredibly unprofitable. So they've had to turn to other means of making money besides lending. And what that means is that even though most people would be glad to take a 0% loan, they're not really available. It's something of an illusory kind of situation. So what's happened is that the lending markets are just completely broken and have been for 5 years. Without lending markets working, the money doesn't actually enter into the economy as the Federal Reserve models would expect. It's what sometimes the Keynesians call pushing on a string, and they're right about that. In an economic environment where there's high pressure for liquidation, you're not going to be able to get those kind of active lending markets that are going to be able to manufacture the sort of expansion of money on the street that the Federal Reserve wants. So they keep these interest rates down ridiculously low, thinking that they're helping the macroeconomic environment, but they're actually not doing anything of the sort. What they're doing is they're preventing an adjustment that needs to take place. We're still trying to adjust out of the 2008 crisis, still, after 5 years. It's pretty incredible.
And a good example of the effect manipulating interest rate has on the economy is the housing bubble that we had back in 2000 to 2007. Without the Federal Reserve putting interest rate to zero, I don't think the housing bubble would have occurred.
Yeah, and there were other factors too. You had the kind of a too big to fail policy coming out of Freddie Mae and Fannie Mac that was pretty grim, so that you had a lot of reckless lending due to kind of heavy government subsidies and, manipulation of interest rates, as you say. There was banking policies that were actively encouraging banks to give loans recklessly. And, all those combined to make a perfect storm. And what's most interesting about that whole incident is that Greenspan didn't anticipate it. He thought the markets were perfectly healthy and fine. He didn't think there was any problems to even worry about.
He ended up being wrong on that, just like Bernanke.
Yep.
Yeah. The Federal Reserve is awful at predicting the economy, so I don't know why people listen to them. Just pure entertainment. Just want to see what they're going to say.
Well, I guess, it's funny that people have this kind of religious devotion to the chairman of the Federal Reserve. It's definitely the triumph of hope over experience to pay attention to what they're saying, that's for sure.
Absolutely. So let's talk about free market and capitalism. Ever since the 2008 financial crisis, I think capitalism got a lot of backlash by Main Street and mainstream and a lot of American people, mainly because of what the big banks did and how it affected the economy, and they had to be bailed out. And also we're seeing higher demand for higher wages from Walmart and all the fast food chain. None of that was happening before the 2008 crisis. And a lot of that demand is happening now, I think, because of the higher inflation that we're having in this country and abroad as well. So I want to ask you, do you think capitalism has a branding or image problem? Because a lot of people confuse capitalism to crony capitalism.
Oh, that's for sure. I mean, it's amazing. I've watched, 15 different documentaries done by left-wing filmmakers in the 2008 crisis. And they just have, no clues about economics at all. It's actually quite pathetic. It's very embarrassing. They keep thinking that all these bank bailouts is the epitome of capitalism. It's actually financial socialism. That's the problem, really. And they can't even make up their minds on what they think. They'll say how unfair it was that the government let Lehman fail and then rescued everybody else. Well, which is it? I mean, should we be letting things fail, or should we be rescuing people? They denounce both, both failures and rescues. So they don't. A lot of these films that are out there just don't have a good theory, and it's because they don't really understand market economics. I think that's the core problem.
And a lot of people forget that without capitalism, we wouldn't have the technology and all the other stuff that we have today, such as Facebook, iPod, the cars, the airplane, all that was created due to free market and capitalism and innovating. So without that...
Yeah, capitalism has been the only source of progress for all time. Government's never created anything and can't create anything, really. That's not the way government is. Government just takes stuff from people and redistributes it. They don't actually make anything. They don't create wealth. They destroy wealth. And that's extremely clear. I was just rereading, actually, a wonderful book by Joseph Schumpeter called Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. And he makes this point very clearly, that capitalism is the great creative engine of civilization. Always has been and always will be. And there's no other way to do it. I have to suffer through Obama's speeches like anybody else. And he is under the impression that somehow government is this great creator of wealth. I mean, he somehow believes it. And it's very strange, actually. And I just listened to a speech that he gave, I guess today or yesterday, something like that, when he was announcing a new highway program. And he always puts these things out there like there's some great investment that's going to help business. But it's actually funny because it's this weird presumption that the government, it's a weird presumption that government officials know what's better for economic life than the market economy. He presumes a kind of an intelligence on the part of planners and bureaucrats and politicians that they just don't have. And yet he accepts it as a kind of a tenet of a religion almost, and as do most people on the left.
Yeah, I agree. The government is not good at solving problems. They just create more problems, and they cannot fix those problems either.
Right.
So, and also, I find it funny that people don't criticize companies like Apple or Amazon because they're created in a free market economy. They were not created by government, and no one complained about what Apple does. They sue Samsung for patent infringement. So they basically don't want any competition with their phones. Amazon, it's a great company, but they also have their problems as well. But no one complaining about them either. They're always complaining. I hear them complaining about Walmart or the fast food chain or the big banks.
Yeah,
I find that funny.
It is strange. I don't really get that. Apple's a capitalistic company, just like any other. Amazon is too. I don't understand why they get a free pass. I've never really understood why it is there's so much hatred for Microsoft, but then love for Apple. That's one of the great mysteries.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Microsoft's not as great as they used to be. And Apple, I mean, all the stuff that they make is overseas in China, and those factories in China are not in great condition, and they underpay their employees, and yet people in this country, I don't hear anybody complaining about that.
It's true. Yeah, Apple gets a free pass. I think it has something to do with the ethos of the company. I'm not entirely sure I understand it. But in any case, you're certainly right. I mean, it's the market in general that's the great creator of wealth, and the more we hinder it, the more we tax it and regulate it, and the more government intervenes and tries to outsmart it, the less well off we're going to be as a society, and the less free we'll be.
I agree. So let's shift gears here and talk about technology and the effect that has in the economy. A lot of people are arguing that robotic and automation, which is in a big rise in this economy due to higher input costs. A lot of big companies are looking at a way to cut costs using robotic and automation, especially in the fast food industry where a lot of people are demanding higher wages. Companies like McDonald's are looking to replace them with machine or touchscreens where people can order their food now. So what effect would this have on the economy? Will it kill jobs or will it create new ones that would be a positive effect on the economy?
It's a kind of a mixed situation. On the one hand, there's nothing wrong with machinery, and we want machinery to do the jobs of human beings so that we can free up human capital to do other things that are more necessary. So in general, mechanization is actually good for economic life. On the other hand, when it comes about because companies are not allowed to take their first best option of actually employing real workers, it's a slight problem because it means that these workers, when they get displaced by machines, can't reallocate their labor resources to other purposes, and it just leads to higher unemployment. So that's kind of a mixed situation. I mean, it's not a bad thing when machines replace jobs if it happens through market means, but if it happens as an emergency measure on the part of companies just because they can't afford to pay their workers anymore because of healthcare mandates or high taxes or minimum wages or whatever, then it's actually a serious problem.
And the government doesn't look like they're going to stop raising taxes or putting more regulations or stop printing money either, which will create more inflation.
No, that's right. It's not going to stop anytime soon. I mean, it's been going on now for 100 years, and I don't expect it to stop anytime soon. There's too many people who benefit from the current system, and it's a real puzzle for you and for me and for everybody who's looking at the situation. Because it gets very confusing. It's like, do these idiots not know what they're doing, or are they really just intellectually confused, or is it they really don't care, And it gets very frustrating for those of us who love the free market to see these kind of things go on.
I think the big problem is a lot of people in the government and Congress never had their own business, never created anything. They were lawyers or they're doctors or they had profession where they never pushed paper all day and never created a product or provided any service to the economy.
That's true.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's hard to understand why they can't understand basic points about logic. For example, on the minimum wages, it's so incredibly obvious that if you put a wage floor on wages and say nobody can work unless they can earn such and such amount, you're definitely going to unemploy those people who don't have the marginal value product embedded in their labor experience to be able to earn that level of wages. It's not going to cause wages to rise. It's just going to cause unemployment to increase. And that's so obvious. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand that a wage floor is going to lead to unemployment. So it's a little bit mysterious to me why. Well, it's not entirely mysterious. I understand it a little bit, but still, there's a lot of people in the media who continue to repeat this nonsense line that somehow raising minimum wage is going to help people. It's not going to help anybody. It's going to make everybody worse off.
And if it wasn't for the inflation and the wealth transfer, this debate about higher minimum wage probably wouldn't be happening right now. If we had deflation in the economy, then people would be fine. They're able to pay their bills and live comfortably. But unfortunately, the government is printing money like a mad scientist, and no end on sight.
Yeah, I think it's true. And if minimum wages are increased, it's going to be devastating for the unemployment rate. It's just going to hurt young workers even more. You referred to that earlier about young workers not being able to find jobs. It's only going to get worse with higher minimum wages.
I agree with you there. So let's shift gears here and talk about Bitcoin, which you're a big supporter of, and talk about the way we look at money. Do you think Bitcoin will revolutionize the way we look at money, and do you think it will be a legitimate threat against the dollar compared to how people look at gold and silver, which they think is also a threat to the dollar?
Well, I was reading an OECD report a couple of days ago about this. It was a very interesting report about cryptocurrencies. And they think that there's no that it's just very obvious that cryptocurrencies are the future. That the technology of the blockchain, the open source nature of the programming, the distributed network, all these things, the use of cryptography, all these combine to make a brilliant technology that's far better than any national money. So they're expecting Bitcoin to go straight up and for its use to just expand and expand, and I expect that too. They cautioned at the end that it'll never replace national monies because national monies are going to be essential for paying taxes, which may be right, but that's a very amazing kind of forecast that, more or less what they're saying is that in the future, national monies will be used to pay taxes, but that's pretty much it. That's kind of an amazing, there's incredible implications to that, if that's true.
Yeah, and a lot of companies are starting to accept Bitcoin as payment, like Overstock.com. They're starting to accept Bitcoin as payment. I think PayPal is starting to look into it as well. So it's here to stay.
It is here to stay. I enjoyed having dinner the other night with Patrick Byrne at Overstock.com, actually. And we talked a lot about the company decision to accept it. And he's considered to be a visionary now, but among all the Fortune 500 companies, actually, because he jumped into the space before anybody else did, and his company has made millions of dollars as a result. So he's quite the amazing person, actually, for having done that.
So would you say you wouldn't be surprised if other companies follow suit, like Amazon and Walmart and other major online companies?
Yeah, they certainly will. It's just going to be a matter of time, There's been a kind of an atmosphere of fear that's been created a little bit. People think that there's something bad or dangerous or criminal associated with Bitcoin, so they're a little bit worried about jumping in too soon. But that's going to start to go away. Actually, you know, it's kind of interesting to me how the government hasn't really engaged in a war on Bitcoin. They've wanted to regulate it. They've wanted to see it not be used for money laundering, that sort of thing. But in terms of its actual use, I think that the regulators at the Federal Reserve and the U.S. Treasury understand that this is the future and there's nothing they can do to stop it. So I think, yeah, I think you're right. In the future, we're going to see more Fortune 500 companies just jump in there and start to accept Bitcoin as a normal payment. The next step is going to be, right now, most companies that accept Bitcoin are immediately converting it to dollars, so using it as a payment system, you know. But in the next step is going to be when companies start doing their accounting in Bitcoin, and that happens when the use of Bitcoin becomes more broad, when they can when they can hold on to their Bitcoins and use it for B2B transactions, you know, when they can supply their inventory needs through spending in Bitcoin, and then that starts to get very, very interesting. And that's just going to be a matter of markets unfolding more or less gradually, but, you know, I don't know what gradually means in this case because, you know, we're only 5 years into this process, and Bitcoin is huge compared to what anybody ever imagined it ever would be. So I don't know what gradually means. It could mean within the next 5 years, you know, we could be seeing Bitcoin being used inside Fortune 500 companies as a routine accounting tool.
And it'll be interesting to see what happens to Bitcoin in the future. I think it's here to stay. I think other cryptocurrencies will start to form and just start seeing people use that as well. So there'll be some competition for Bitcoin in the future, don't you think?
People I think there'll be some competition. We haven't had monetary competition in this country for about 100, maybe 60 years or something like that. So it's going to be interesting to see how that competition works itself out in the crypto realm. We're really entering into uncharted territory here, so nobody really knows what's going to happen. It's going to be fascinating to watch. You know, I think it's what's interesting about this is that as I look back over the last 13 months or so, all the mainstream predictions of Bitcoin's death have been wrong. You know, they keep, every time something happens, the price falls, Mt. Gox crashes, you know, Silk Road's taken down, you know, whatever kind of big event hits the news, there's all these experts that come out and say, oh, well, that's the end of Bitcoin, so much for the great dream of Bitcoin. But actually, in fact, what happens is that Bitcoin just gets stronger every single time. You know, it's kind of amazing.
Yeah, and people should just do the opposite of what the public is saying. If they say it's bad, it's good. If it's good, then it's bad. It's the same for investing and anything else you see in the economy as well. People say there's no housing bubble, then the housing bubble will happen.
Yeah, that's for sure. I know. I should have kept all these clippings, but there's just so many headlines over the last 14 months have been something like, you know, Bitcoin bites the dust is the usual headline. It's just hilarious, actually. Yeah,
absolutely hilarious. But before we let you go, can you tell our listeners more about Liberty.me?
Yeah, it's in a very exciting community. We've only been open about 6 weeks. Our traffic rank is soaring. We're getting all kinds of new members every day, and the reason people are joining is that it's a really wonderful community in the cloud for learning about things like Bitcoin and for learning about investing and learning about ways that you can figure out a way around the Leviathan state. It's a very friendly community. We have publishing platforms for everybody, so you can write and actually get an audience for your work. We have hundreds of books for download, discussions related to each book, news feeds, and ongoing 24/7 chat. It's a really friendly, happy community of people who just want to have more liberty in their life. So I'm very pleased at how it's going, and we're a commercial enterprise, and I'm very pleased by how it goes. Also, we have nightly classes, which has been fun. Last night I taught a class, and I'm going to be teaching again this Thursday.
And that's great. And I checked out the website. It's a very good website, good platform to talk to other libertarians and Austrian economist followers as well. So, Jeffrey Tucker, thank you for joining us. And people want to find more about what you do and your work. Where can they go?
Just go over to liberty.me. You can see my writings up there at the top of the page almost every day. If you want to go to my stuff in particular, it's tucker.liberty.me. So I'd be glad to hear from you. And if you join the community, just say hello and chat, and we'll talk some more.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Very much. Thank you for having me on your show.